Thank you for tuning in to Watchtower Deprogrammer. My name is George Doggett. I have been deprogramming Jehovah's Witnesses since September 1990. I loved being among Jehovah's Witnesses for 25 years. At one time, this organization was my family. Jehovah was my father, the organization was my mother, and I was among brothers and sisters. I, like them, was a follower of the new light emanating from Almighty God and directed and channeled through His faithful and discreet slave. Cults, such as Scientologists, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, are incredibly successful. You know why? Because they give people work to do. They give them a sense of importance. For example, my uncle became a Mormon, and with hardly any basis of Mormon doctrine and being able to defend it, first thing you know, he's part of the Melchizedek priesthood. And when one becomes a Scientologist, he is invited to immediately start recruiting other people. And when one becomes a Jehovah's Witness, he comes from the point of being a spectator to becoming a walking, talking salesman of God's kingdom, using a sales brochure of the Watchtower to sell a plot of land on a paradise earth. The mantra of the Watchtower hierarchy is, if you want to keep them walking, keep them talking, and you can keep them from thinking. But I think many Jehovah's Witnesses, if not most, kind of feel like there's just something wrong, but for the life of you, you just can't put your finger on what it is. And so the witness gets on an endless treadmill of meetings and study and activity. There's very little time for quiet reflection, a little time to sort things out, and so one day just flows into another. Well, today, I'd like to ask you to pause for about the next 9 or so minutes to reflect upon others like yourself, others who were sold out to God's kingdom. They walked it, they talked it, they lived it, just as you, if you are a Jehovah's Witness, do. The first person to enter my life as a Jehovah's Witness was D.C. Cahoon. Elderly and walking with a cane, he came to my house bearing Watchtower publications when I was about 12 years old and placed a book called Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained with my mother. He returned to try to start a home Bible study, but she declined interest, and so DC was turned over to me to entertain. Well, I was new in Richmond at the time. I didn't know anybody. I had lived in the country. My natural father had just recently been killed in an automobile accident, and my divorced mother had remarried, and we had moved to Richmond, and I didn't know a soul. I hadn't established myself with any church. I didn't know anybody. So to have an adult like DC take an interest in me and read a book with me and look up scriptures with me was an exciting experience. I went to his church called a Kingdom Hall, and thus was to begin my stint with the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society that would consume the next 25 years of my life as a walking, talking salesman of God's kingdom. I saw great conviction in those people attending the Kingdom Hall and in my study conductor. Now, DC, when he was just a young boy, was afflicted with severe rheumatoid arthritis. And he came across studies in the scriptures by Pastor Russell. He lived on a rural area in North Carolina, and he really was not physically able to do much on the farm. So his parents were as loving and as attentive to him as they could be, and so they simply had allowed him to stay in his unheated farm room house room and read. And DC read with rapt attention Pastor Russell's studies in the scriptures. Now, without benefit of other Watchtower believers, DC tethered up his horse and his buggy and went out distributing studies in the scriptures. Back in those days, there was no such thing as a systematic Bible study. You didn't do return visits. Colporteurs acted as book salesmen, and they were allowed to live off of the meager proceeds of the studies in the scriptures books. Well, DC met Nanette, and Nanette's mother had been one of the original stockholders of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. In fact, Nanette and DC inherited the stock when Nanette's mother died, and they attended all of the corporate meetings up until the time of death. And Nanette and DC were privy to first-hand experience going through all of the things mentioned in the Proclaimer's book, the great events of Jehovah's Witness Watchtower history. But they told me about an event one time that really really stunned me. Nanette said that Fred Franz came out on stage and he opened up with the statement, "There are Sarim among us today." And Nanette said the friends, as Jehovah's Witnesses call themselves, some of the friends got up, they started crying, others were softly praying, some of them were trembling, and some of them were just so anxious. And she said to herself, "I don't think he should have said that." The noise got louder, and Fred Franz, I am told, turned white as a sheet because he obviously didn't expect this reaction. His intention was to announce that those who were congregation servants and those that were taking ministerial servant type assignments in the congregation would be the future princes, the ones having responsibility in the future on the paradise earth. But that's not the way the friends understood it. That's not what they expected. The friends fully expected Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to come out from behind the curtains and come up on stage, and I'm serious. You see, the witnesses had been emotionally conditioned. They had been mentally programmed through the years of indoctrination to expect Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to come back to earth. And in preparation for the return of the ancient worthies, the Watchtower was so certain of its new light teaching that it had a mansion built in San Diego, California, called Beth Sarim. Beth means house, and Sarim means princes. It was built as a house of princes, just like Bethel is El for God, house of God. And by the way, there's an interesting little tidbit. People know about Beth Sarim, but they don't often know that there were other Sarim properties, Beth Sarim properties, other than the primary one. Just an interesting little tidbit. Well, the churches and society at large were amused to think that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob wouldn't want to be resurrected to live in that old dusty Palestine when they had luxurious accommodations in chic San Diego. Now, to make the worthies feel more at home, the Watchtower Society arranged to plant a lot of palm trees around the property, and that was to make the worthies think that they were at home on the other side of the world. Now, possessed of the certainty that millions now living will never die, a legal deed was drawn up and recorded in San Diego County, conveying the property to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. If you want to see the deed yourself, you can absolutely see it online. Do your own research. Just Google Beth Sarim, and it's just a fantastic new light teaching. And you can go to San Diego County appraisal records, and you can actually see the original deed to the property, since it is a public record. Sadly, the two new light teachings were flawed. The first new light teaching that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob would be absolutely resurrected in 1925, and the Watchtower taught this with even greater conviction than their belief in 1914. But it was false. It was embarrassingly false to the channel of communication, and apparently something got miscommunicated. Anyhow, the Watchtower Society just kind of quietly sold the mansion. The second New Light teaching, that millions now living will never die, was also disappointing, because millions then living are now dead as a doornail today. Now, I was lucky to have heard these first-hand experiences from Nanette and DC. They did die faithful to the Watchtower organization. Nanette died in 1975, saying, "I wanted to be around to see things wrapped up." She died with hope of a deferred hope and a life on hold for an Armageddon that was always around the corner, but somehow never managed to show up. When I asked her about the failed prophecies, here's what she said, quote, "I'll never forget it. Oh, we just laughed it off. The nearness of Armageddon always kept us on the safe side of Jehovah," end quote. There's a lot of meaning in that. To think that a person would be in fear and live in fear of God their entire lives. After Nanette passed, DC spent his final moments in a Catholic hospital in Richmond, Virginia, and he summoned for a priest. So the priest went to see what the old Jehovah's Witness person would want, and DC instructed him to remove the crucifix from his room. I mean, he was a true believer. This account of Nanette and DC would most likely die with me if I had not shared it with you today. I hope you will translate it, that you will transfer it to other people. I buried Nanette and DC many years ago. I loved them dearly. They spent their youth, they spent their adult lives living for an Armageddon that never showed up. They believed that 1925 would see the return of the ancient worthies based on New Light. They died believing the New Light, that those living in 1914 would live to see Armageddon. Interestingly enough, they were not such big believers that 6,000 years of human existence was going to end in 1975. They'd had an apple out of failed prophecies before, and they didn't say it publicly, but they said it to me privately, not to get too wrapped up in that, and so I didn't until the very end. The sad part of this story is that not one promise that was made to that dear couple that the Watchtower Society made ever came true. There was not one promise that they made to them. There was no return of the worthies. Nobody showed up to live in the mansion in San Diego. There was no 1975 end of the world as we were anticipating it, and they spent their entire lives, people, on something that simply was not based upon real New Light. I feel a sense of loss and a sense of sadness, but I also sense great respect and love and devotion for what Nanette and DC taught me. They taught me to love God. They taught me to not care about what people thought about me, and they taught me to stand up for what I believed was right. Today, I close submitting that I know what I know, that the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society is not the channel of communication, the channel of New Light that we were taught and led to believe that it was. If you're tired of the Watchtower treadmill of meetings and works and studies, I want you to pause right now at the end of this video, and I want you to go look up Beth, B-E-T-H, next word Sarim, S-A-R-I-M, on your computer. I want you to go to the appraisal records. I want you to see the deed. I want you to see the Watchtower book, see the pictures, and I want you to ask yourself, do I want to follow New Light as Nanette and DC did? My name is George Doggett. Please tune in to the next session when we will continue with the faithful New Light followers. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time.